Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
And we're here to talk tech. A couple of recent announcements that caught my attention, Dave. The first from Verizon, that they will soon be offering or are about to launch a 2 gigabit symmetrical service in New York City for consumers. That's 2 gigabit up and 2 gigabit down symmetrical broadband service. And incredibly fast, but I'm wondering, who's going to use it and for what? What's your thinking on that, David?
Well, how often every month is 50 megabits not enough for what you do?
I don't think that's ever not enough for me.
Yeah, if you're doing massive downloading, you can use a few hundred. But short of that, or a professional video studio, you don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great, in fact, Korea was the first to go to a gigabit on fiber for most consumers. And I asked, what do people do with it? And in fact, I was in Korea, this must have been 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asking, I made a point of asking a lot of people, what do you use it for? And the only answer that came up, showing off to our friends how fast our connection is using the speed test.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason this is happening is that the difference in cost between the 1 gig hardware and the 10 gig hardware is only a few dollars. And Bell Canada 3 years ago, AT&T last year, and now Verizon has started putting in the 10 gig equipment instead of the one gig equipment.
Mm-hmm.
AT&T is in fact selling 5 gigs in a lot of places. And all the 15 million new lines that AT&T is putting in in the next 4 years will have 10 gig available. It's a great thing to have if you want to connect a big business. And so it makes sense for them to put in the equipment for the one commercial customer they may have there.
Mm-hmm.
Because the cost is almost the same. Now, somebody I care about a great deal, I had this discussion with and asked her the same question. How often will you use more than 50? And she didn't have an answer. But she's paying Verizon an extra $11 a month to get a full gigabit instead of getting 200 megabits.
Mm.
And there's no difference
Mm-hmm.
for any practical purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels good to have the extra capacity.
Well,
Let me ask you.
Bragging rights, yeah, but I don't know that it feels good in terms of your operations and functionality.
Well, in her case, she does do video professionally, and sometimes has some really big files to move.
Mm-hmm.
But there are very few things on the other end that could accept them at more than a gigabit, or send them, or even more than. Yeah, you probably could get up to 500 or 800 megabits, going to an excellent server. And the video people sometimes do have excellent servers.
Well, let me ask you, Dave, just a little bit of a nerdy question, if you could explain. Where in the network do these providers have to upgrade their equipment? You said it's not much difference in cost between the 1 gig and the 10 gig. Where, at what points within the network do they have to upgrade to this new 10 gig equipment?
Well, what they're doing so far is they're upgrading what's called the OLT, which is the box that your fiber is connected to in the central office or in the remote terminal.
Mm-hmm.
To actually give you more than a gigabit, they have to give you a new ONT, which is like a modem for you at home as well. But since they're charging you more, they're perfectly happy to give you a new box. They're cheap.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Wow.
now it turns out that once you're behind the box you're connected to, whether it be a DSLAM for DSL, an OLT for fiber, or a cable CMTS, behind that, you'd always have a shared connection. Verizon is probably putting in a 10 gig, and that's going to be enough for years to give a lot of people 2 gig, because there are not many people who are going to be using the 2 gig at any one moment.
Mm. So you're saying that a 10 gig is shared by a number of people?
Yeah, 15 to probably 144.
Wow, people
Yeah,
sharing the 10 gig circuit.
right. But
Gotcha.
a 1 gig circuit can give a gig or 800 megabits 90% of the time to just as many people. Because
Wow.
when you're watching HDTV, you're using 4 megabits.
Mm.
It's hard. Very few, most people are drawing 10, 15 megabits at most, unless they're downloading. I had this out with a cable flack. He was telling me that it was okay to make that they eliminated their $25 decent speed service and forced you to get their $70 service, which did have a 200 meg download. And he said, well, people may have 10 or 12 devices hooked up, and lots of people do. But most of those devices are things like your, I'm looking around me. I have, those devices might be a phone like this one, for example, working over Wi-Fi, or it might be a 4K TV and so on. And I asked him the same question. How often do you use 50 megabits? And he promptly changed the subject. Yeah.
So it's more marketing hype than anything else. It sounds like that.
Yeah. And I sat through a couple of presentations for telcos on how you can persuade people to buy the gigabit even though they don't need it. Now, they left out the even though they don't need it in those presentations.
Right.
And it wasn't my place to bring up that question then. Similar thing, phones.
Mm-hmm.
How many people need $1,000 phone instead of a $300 phone?
You know, I would think very few, Dave. You know, I have a $200 phone, and for the most part, I'm able to do everything I need to do. So I have no idea what kind of functionality I would get for 5 times that amount. I can't imagine what that would be.
Well, I'm on a $135 phone, the cheapest 5G phone in America. It comes from Boost Mobile, and they probably subsidize it a little bit. And as you can hear me, obviously, so it's certainly fine for voice. How clear is my video when you look at it, Stu?
It's very sharp.
Well, by my standards, it's not very sharp. And that's the big difference. The cameras in the cheap phones are so good that you're saying they're very sharp. But for Jenny, who does video professionally, that's her iPhone is better. There's another good reason to spend money for an iPhone, because iPhones have the smoothest operating system of any phones there. Android has all the same functions, but everything runs better on an iPhone. Not everything, but lots of things. So there's a reason people want iPhones. And Apple decided they were going to have to come up with an answer to that 3 years ago with cheap $100, $300 Android phones. an iPhone starting at about $800, they decided to come up with a $400 unit, which basically was the iPhone from 2 or 3 years before.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be very interesting in a month, because the rumor is highly likely, or the rumor is highly likely to be true, that the new $400 5G iPhone is going to hit the market,
Mm-hmm.
which will, of course, drive down the prices of the $300 phones and even the $200 phones. That should be a very hot product. At this point, 75+% of all the iPhones are 5G. They sell some of the older models, including the $400 unit. As the $400 unit goes to 5G, that will definitely bring Apple very close to 100% 5G. And Apple is half the phones sold in the US every year. The other thing you get for more money is you do get more memory. You get a faster processor, which is good if you're running games, but makes no difference, for example, if we're doing this video. And it's more attractive, and it probably has a bigger screen. And if you love iPhones, or for some reason love Samsungs, you do get a better phone, but I'm perfectly happy with this one. But it's true, when I want to take a really good-looking photo, this phone doesn't quite make it like a semi-professional camera. And the current versions from Huawei and Apple and Samsung at the high end, they are very, very close to a professional caliber camera. Mm-hmm. Mostly because of the tricks they can do in software, mm-hmm. which is pretty good. Mm-hmm. The other thing that they announced today is 2 new Samsungs. I'm not at least bit interested in the Samsung phones for $700 to $1,100 that were announced, because it's just like a whole pile of other phones at mm-hmm. that price range. They're slightly cheaper than the last generation of Samsung. They have slightly better cameras, and
that was a yawn for those folks who are not watching. Just listen, that was a big yawn from Dave.
Yeah. The other thing they had is something I'd really like. It's a 14-inch tablet, like an iPad, with a high-resolution screen and good sound. I'd love it. It didn't cost $900 to $1,100.
Wow, that's seeming to be so pricey for a tablet. I mean, that's, I mean, you can get a pretty good computer for that. But I guess, you got the functionality.
You can get a pretty good computer for $300. Thank you. Yeah. But some people have the money, mm-hmm. and I would like it to be able to look at PDF books. Mm-hmm. That on the smaller tablets, it's really hard to read a PDF. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I have a slew of art books, for example, that would look really great on this.
I have a 10-inch Amazon Fire tablet that is, I think it's about $150 or so. And for the most part,
it goes on sale twice a year for $100.
Yeah, it does everything I need it to do. I mean, it's not the high res that I'm sure the $800, $900 unit is, but I'm perfectly fine reading PDFs, perfectly fine cruising websites and such. So, I mean, to spend 4 or 5 times that amount of money, I mean, I'd have to have some incredible functionality to do that.
Well, some people have all the money.
Yeah, I guess they're not driven by the financial decision. Yeah.
And
the other thing, Dave, I just want to get your take on this that would make me crazy. Maybe I'm just a little older and kind of getting a little set in my ways, but to have a $500, $600, $700, $800 unit in my pocket walking around, to me that's a frightening proposition. Sit on it, drop it, lose it, forget it. I mean, that's a lot of money to be carrying around on a day-to-day basis, in my mind.
A few years ago, the New York cops explaining why theft was so high said that those iPhones everybody's carrying was really tempting crooks to buy them,
Mm-hmm.
to grab them,
Mm-hmm.
rather.
Mm-hmm.
And I lose things,
Yes.
and I break things,
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't want to lose or break an $800 phone.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
But Jenny could put to use the better phone because she can get incredible video.
You know, she's a professional photographer, so that I understand that.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
What else do we have this week?
Well, there's some recent talk about reforming the way that the Universal Service Fund works. And for folks out there in the audience who may not know what that is, that's a way that the federal government historically collects tax based from telecom carriers based on their telephone traffic. And that tax is used to fund low-income consumers and Lifeline service. And the revenue base for that, because regular phone call traffic is dwindling as a business, is shrinking. And so there's now some concern and that there won't be enough money in the Universal Service Fund to fund all of the federal subsidy programs, something that $8 to $10 billion a year, Dave. So now the feds are talking about let's tax the broadband service from the telecom carriers, and also let's tax the internet companies. I know you know a little bit of something about that piece, so I'd like you to elaborate on what you know about that.
First of all, this is thoroughly ridiculous because those $10 billion can be cut by more than half easily. It turns out that everybody who qualifies for the low-income subsidy also qualifies for the $30 new ACP subsidy. And the telcos are busily switching everybody off the $10 service onto the $30 service, which is paid for out of the federal budget, not out of USF. The other thing is most of the money goes to telcos, especially the big ones, it turns out. And they are being subsidized at somewhere between 2 and 4 times the amount it would make sense to subsidize rural service. This has been a scandal ongoing for since before I started finding out about it in 2005. That the little telcos, who are very important to the senators from rural states, have set the rules so that they make out like bandits. And everybody knows it. Some prominent academics 10, 12 years ago from Stanford, Georgia Tech, and so on, looked at it and said the amounts were ridiculous. And in fact, I know it was more than the 15 years that I've been watching this, because my friend Bob Atkinson was at the FCC in the 1990s, and he was complaining about how ridiculous the subsidy was. So anybody who says we have to do this to get more money to give to the telcos should be looked at and laughed at, because we're giving the telcos so much money that what should be done is we should eliminate some of the waste in the program, especially because the Lifeline service, which is valuable, which had been the $10 service, is being eliminated by the ACP. And that's right. Now, let's talk about that $30 service. If you were AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile, what could you give customers for $30 and still make a profit?
Probably that low tier that you used to sell for $10.
Well, it's more than that. AT&T, where they have their 15 million lines of fiber, will now give you up to 100 megabits. And since this is the fiber, it will usually be 100 megabits with no cap at all. They took their low-income program and decided to get the $30, make money on that, and win customers. And in fact, people are out there saying, free internet from AT&T. I'd grab it in a minute if Verizon had it here. But neither Verizon nor the cable companies have that offer yet. I'm expecting T-Mobile to put that offer out around the country. And I'd be ready to switch to it immediately. In fact, I'm ready to switch to it now for their $50 service, but they don't offer my location yet, because I'm getting 50 upstream on a T-Mobile phone and 90 downstream indoors in my apartment. No, that's what the new phones are getting.
Okay.
It's not because they're 5G instead of 4G. It's because they suddenly are using 100 megahertz of mid-band spectrum instead of 20 megahertz of low-band spectrum. If you ran 4G on it, you get almost the same speed.
Now, what happens, Dave, if you turn that phone into a hotspot in your home? Is that possible?
And in fact, it is. And most of the offerings have limits on how much of that you can do. But you do even better getting the little box that is the hotspot, because it's bigger than the phone, so it can have a bigger antenna and plug in, so it gets even better reception and doesn't need batteries charged all the time. And then use WhatsApp for your phone calls or Skype or whatever you choose to use. I've had WhatsApp on my phone, and suddenly, a few weeks ago, when I was calling Jenny, it automatically was a video call. And I thought that was Boost Mobile, where I get my T-Mobile connection from. But no, it's set up that when I was dialing, it automatically would try to do a video call via WhatsApp before it went to the phone network. And WhatsApp works just as well as the phone network by connecting you. It happens to be free. So I could sit there with my box, my CPE, that'll be a box, not too big, but has antennas that are 2 or 3 times the size of a cell phone. Doesn't need batteries because I can plug it into the wall, and goes through my house via Wi-Fi at better speeds than I'm getting from the cable company, which is currently selling me 100 over 10 for $70. T-Mobile selling that for $50 now. And I think they're going to come up with a deal to take that down to $30, because the same thing that makes the phone so fast, all this extra spectrum, also gives the phone companies more capacity than they can possibly sell at current prices. So they're all looking at ways to get some additional customers, because once the network is built, the capacity is almost free.
So what's the service called, Dave, so folks can start to look around and pay attention for its availability? What's this hotspot?
The industry calls it FWA, fixed wireless access. If you just go to T-Mobile, you'll see they have an offering for home internet or something like that. I don't know what they call it. AT&T service, which isn't available on mobile, but is available to 15 million homes where they have fiber, is called Access from AT&T. And Verizon is called Greedy instead of Access. There's no reason they can't do exactly what AT&T did. They don't make quite as much money. Remember, the US phone rates, mobile rates, and broadband rates are about twice as high as they are in competitive countries like France.
Mhm. Now, Dave, why did I just see a headline in the story in one of these journals that the price is dropping for broadband in the U.S.? Is that really true? That sounded like, manipulation of numbers. Did you see that that story?
If it is, the drop is so small.
Mhm.
Actually, the vast bulk of Americans who are on cable have been seeing increases every year for the last few years.
Mhm.
The cost to the cable companies has been going down because Moore's Law makes the equipment cheaper every year. But they've been quietly raising it 2%, 4% every year. This year with inflation, they'll go for 8 or 10. And that, after 5 and 10 years of those little increases, winds up with a price that's twice as high as it would be if it were competitive. They are getting better speeds. So that's probably how they got it. They turned around and said, well, your cost per bit is lower because you can get 200 megabits, but I never used 200.
Right,
megabits.
exactly. Got you. That's the trick. That's
Yeah,
the trick.
but the basic rate for the service, because bandwidth is really cheap, less than $1 a month per user. So, and that's the main difference between giving you higher bandwidth, assuming your equipment is able to do it. So it costs them almost nothing to give you more megabits, except they don't want to do it because they can charge you more if they have higher prices for more megabits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a brief break here, Dave, and let our audience know that they're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. You're listening to Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. We'll be right back with more tech talk, so stay tuned. Okay, this is Community and Technology. We're back. That was Sun Ra and his Intergalactic Orchestra from Night of the Purple Moon, and featured renowned tenor saxophonist, saxophonist, I should say, John Gilmore. So we're back. Dave is going to unmute his mic, and we're going to continue our conversation about what's going on in tech today. Dave, when you unmute yourself, Dave, I wanted to talk about what's going on, and you sent me an interesting story about Palestine and their efforts over there to, sound like they're being restricted by the Israeli government in terms of their use of frequencies and use of spectrum. What's going on over
there? In Gaza, because its spectrum and radio is controlled by the Israelis, they could only get 2G. 2G went out in the United States and Israel around 2005. It is so slow, it is almost unusable for anything on the internet today. You can't, downloading a map can take 5 or 10 minutes. That is all that is available to the citizens of Gaza. On the West Bank, it's a little bit better. They can get 3G. 3G can get up to a couple of megabits. In Israel, everybody has 4G. We're at 50 megabits and more. And they're now putting in 5G. Is this right? Well, the ITU and the UN and everybody has been criticizing the government of Israel. The government of Israel is refusing to allocate spectrum to the Palestinians, even though there's plenty of available spectrum. And they gave 500 megahertz, enough for 5 or 6 networks, to the settlers on the West Bank. I don't think I have to say anything political beyond that. That's the facts, and anybody listening to this can make up their own mind about whether throttling the Palestinian internet is acceptable.
Let me ask you this, Dave. What is prohibiting the Palestinians from taking control of spectrum themselves?
The fact that the Israelis would send a jet or a drone and bomb the hell out of the building. Well, remember that Israel, in the periodic small wars may mean only 1,000 or 2 people get killed, but the Palestinians routinely knocks out the radio stations and the wireless towers to make it harder for the Palestinians to communicate. So they're routinely bombed. So no, the Palestinians don't have any way to put up an alternate network. Paltel, which has a few million customers, is perfectly able to do it. I've met some of the Paltel people. They're perfectly competent engineers. They can call up Nokia or Huawei and have a network in there in 3 months.
This is a Palestinian technology company, Paltel.
Palestine Telecom,
okay,
which is I believe semi-privatized, and is the largest business in the Palestinian territories.
So they've got the technical expertise.
Yeah, they're fine. I had 2 in a seminar I was doing on 200 megabit DSL, and there were 2 people there, which was state of the art. and there were a couple of Palestinians in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Women, incidentally. Why so many Americans have the image of women in the Arab world wearing burqas. In fact, in Egypt and in Palestine, most women don't even wear a hijab, and it's entirely optional. And women play a surprisingly strong role when I see anything in technology out of the Arab world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a sense of how much we lose with discrimination. We know here how much, well, I shouldn't say we all know. Most people realize that we pay a terrible price for holding back the talented 10th, the Black people who haven't been able to contribute as much as they're able for racial reasons in the United States. This plays true internationally as well. That if you keep out of the international exchange, the Arabs, the Russians, the Chinese, you're cutting yourself off from some of the most capable people in the world. And what made me think of that is I just got word on who just won the Marconi Prize, the biggest prize in communications. It was Alamuti of Alamuti coding, an Iranian who now lives in Canada. And I remember I interviewed Paul Rush, Stanford professor, also Marconi winner, invented MIMO, probably done more in communication than engineering than anybody else on earth. And he said, the one thing I wish I had come up with was the Alamuti theorem. That was really subtle and unexpected.
What is that, Dave? Right? I don't know about that. What is it?
It's some complicated coding that I don't know if I'd be able to explain, even if I had a blackboard and could give you the equations.
But it helps the MIMO work, which is
It helps your phone.
okay.
Your phone is more efficient because of Alamuti's work. Now, that's another bit. Paul Raj is at Stanford now. He spent the first 45 years and got most of his training in India. Did we talk about who's the head of Microsoft?
Yeah, we talked last week. You were telling myself, I didn't know, and our audience as well, that a number of the heads of these big tech giants are now from India.
And that is something that makes a difference. One reason Google and Microsoft are so successful these days is some extraordinary engineers, many of which are from India, some of which are from Pakistan, Iran, and even Palestine. Forgetting her name. One of the most respected engineers in communication. She does deep work in signal processing, is an MIT professor, a Palestinian refugee. And although anybody who thinks that we should exclude people doesn't realize the high price that's paid, because some of the people we exclude can do wonderful things. Now, who came up with these incredible mRNA vaccines? Do you happen to know, Stu?
No, I do not.
There are two of them. One of them comes from an American company, Moderna, and another comes from a German company. And the scientists there who own the company are both from Turkey. And of course, Europe has been, and especially Germany, has been discriminating against Turks very heavily for many years. And frankly, if we didn't have the second vaccine, more people would have died.
Mhm.
It goes like that.
Wow.
Uh,
I mean, so maybe the dynamic, Dave. I'm just hypothesizing now. Maybe the dynamic is that folks from so many of these countries that are under the thumb of other governments and don't have the freedoms that we do, have gone on and left their country and gone to other places to get educated and are highly motivated to exceed and have succeeded in some incredible ways. Maybe because of all the oppression at home.
well, we certainly know that happened when Jews had to leave Germany, starting
Mhm.
with Albert Einstein
Mhm.
and Hannah Arendt, and an incredible list of several of the people who worked on the US atom bomb with German refugees. But it's not a matter of freedom versus authoritarianism. In fact, many of the best engineers in the world, of course, are in China, which is matching the United States and ahead of us in some important ways. We had a show here a while back with a Berkeley professor, Berkeley or Stanford, about quantum computing, where China is far ahead of us in one way. In fact, people are going back to China, and not just winter athletes who just won some gold.
Mm-hmm.
And Tsinghua University in Beijing is considered by my friend who teaches at Stanford to be a peer, just as good. And he only says that about two other universities, Berkeley and MIT.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that Iran, Sharif University in Iran, has excellent engineers. Same thing I heard from my Stanford friends is he said his best graduate students have been coming from Sharif.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean I'm in favor of authoritarian governments, but not working with them exacts a price at every level.
Yeah, yeah.
And frankly, with some of the things I've seen here on voting rights and police killing people, I wouldn't want to hold up the United States as a model of democracy. And yes, it's not. Obviously, China does have more state control, an unbelievable amount. But the US shouldn't be the one pointing that out.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the oppression is much more subtle and insidious here. It's not always in your face like it is in some of the other countries, although often it is, especially for Black folk. But no, the U.S. is certainly, in my mind, not a model for the rest of the world. Maybe the rhetoric is, but the behavior is just not consistent.
Let's get away from politics.
Yeah.
What's the technical story?
Okay. Well, it's almost tax season. And I read an interesting piece that the IRS is getting rid of a facial recognition technology that they had rolled out and were requiring and about to go system wide for folks to create an account with the IRS, which you need to do a whole lot of things online with the IRS. And they had required that you submit your photo and that you be certified as to who you are via facial recognition. Well, there was a huge backlash on both sides of the political spectrum. And they just announced that they are pulling that facial recognition program altogether. It had been trumpeted as a way to help with fraud and other kinds of nefarious activities that historically have gone on with the IRS, people faking identities and getting refunds under other people's names and stuff like that. The facial recognition technology system was supposed to help ameliorate that. Well, as we've discussed with some of the experts that have been on our show, Dave, facial recognition technology itself is greatly flawed. And although it may sound good, it doesn't actually work with a high degree of reliability. So IRS just got rid of that platform, and I think that's probably a good thing.
Well, sometimes there's good news from Washington.
Yeah, how about that?
On the other hand, there's the Earn It Act that wants to eliminate any privacy controls by de facto preventing you from using effective cryptology.
Which act is this, Dave? What is this?
This is called the Earn It Act. It's getting a fair amount. It's in hearings now, and it's presented as, well, if we could break into everybody's correspondence, maybe we might catch some child pornographers, which is true. But the price of that is destroying cryptography and the privacy we count on.
So this is some backdoor legislation that not backdoor legislation, but legislation that would enable backdoor access by law enforcement to encrypted data. Is that what it is?
That kind of thing. I haven't looked at all the details, but I keep getting emails about why I should oppose it from people I respect. Yeah.
You know, I saw an interesting piece, Dave, and I know this is someone that you've talked about a lot on our show, Vint Cerf, who's often called the father of the internet for all of his pioneering technological stuff back in the 70s. And he just posted something called Ask Me Anything with Vint Cerf, and he's going to be available for a Q&A this Friday from anybody that wants to go online and speak with him. Had you heard about that?
Yeah. Vint is now close to 80, but he's completely cogent. He's active. He had a nasty bout of COVID, but he made it through. And he's doing things like joining official committees in England that are making important recommendations on this kind of thing. He's extremely articulate. He's a nice guy. Unlike many of the engineers at that level, like Alamuti, who Vint is actually giving the award to, he runs the Mahoney Foundation, you can usually understand what he's talking about. He is able to translate into English things. I don't have the information in front of me for where that is. I think it's Friday.
It is Friday, 8:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. UCT time. I guess that's 5 hours later, so that would be 3:30 to 4:30 East Coast time. I don't have the link, but if our listeners want to check it out, I would say Google Ask Me Anything with Vint Cerf, C-E-R-F. And the link should come up, and it's a free conversation and dialogue with one of the true pioneers in the internet industry.
Yeah. What Vint did is he came up with the IP protocol. He and his partner, Bob Kahn, which runs the entire internet. And it was developed in the 1970s to hook up a few university computers. And they did such a good job that it now is connecting 5 billion people.
Wow.
Yeah. That's brilliant piece of work. Understanding what was necessary for the future. Wow. Yeah. So Vint's work is extraordinary. Another one that's coming up, I'll get the information when you're talking, is Len Kreinrock, who at UCLA hooked up the first node of the internet in the early 70s. And he's talking in a John Hopkins event that I'll find that's free. So cover the next story and I'll get the details on that one.
Okay, well, the next story. Good question, Dave, because I think I'm about out of stories for today. I did want to just mention briefly, we were talking about the SEC earlier. They are establishing a task force to fight discrimination in terms of access to digital equity. And
can I laugh out loud?
I think it's kind of ridiculous. I don't know what the heck are they going to do. They're going to focus on creating rules and policies to combat digital discrimination, to promote equal access to broadband across the country, regardless of zip code, income level, ethnicity, race, religion, or national origin, according to the press release. Now, how the heck are they going to do that? I mean, it sounds good, but in footnote, they said, oh, we're going to revise our complaint process to, quote, seek feedback from more prominently from those who may be facing digital discrimination in their communities. Also, so they're going to ask the people that are getting denied and discriminated against, oh, tell us about the problem. It's kind of unique. Usually they come up with the solutions on their own without even talking to the folks that are being affected.
It is a real problem. The only place in the United States, other than the extreme rural areas of 3% of the country, where people often can't get any kind of broadband, is rural areas in the South.
Mm-hmm.
Because neither the cable companies nor Bell South built in those territories. So there are a couple of million people, I think majority Black, who can't connect except by satellite. However, this task force is a joke. As I say, may I laugh out loud? Because there's upwards of $70 billion budgeted already through NTIA, RUS, ARPA, and more to reach the few people who are currently unserved. It's about 4 times as much money as it would take to get the United States up to 99%, which is almost guaranteed to happen because there's $42 billion to do just that already at NTIA. So that there are real issues of areas that couldn't connect. Not so many. There are a lot of areas that can't get as good a connection as others. We did a show a while back about how T-Mobile and Verizon were building out their early 5G networks, and the map could have been, you could take a map of the affluent, mostly white areas of the city, and it matched the maps of what they were building.
Mm.
But all of New York and 90% of the United States is going to have 100 megabits wireless available in 2 years. At this point, about 60% does. So the very few nodes which aren't being covered, probably about 4%. It is something that should be fixed. It is going to be fixed. And we don't need a whole pile of people pontificating on how to do it. Mostly when you look at those things, they come out, give me and people like me and the companies that I'm supporting money.
Yeah.
And the amount of money, the AT&T guy, Sambar, just talked about the glut of funding available. He's expecting to get billions.
And he's talking about a glut. Wow, that's incredible. Well, Dave, my experience, and the work that my folks are doing, and that is to bring free internet access, because it's not enough for service to be available. It has to be accessible, and it has to be meaningful, and folks have to be really aware and involved in how to use it and how it can benefit them. So, we're doing a lot of stuff on the ground with folks, and, working collaboratively with the people that are underserved and in need. And I think when you do that kind of changes the equation.
Well, in terms of getting people connected, that money is there. Mm-hmm. The $30 ACP would more than cover an organization like you building out, wiring or unwiring a whole building.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking more about that, Dave, as we get going, because we do have a lot of stuff cooking, but I can't really talk about it just yet.
AT&T is already doing it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the big guys are definitely taking advantage of the subsidy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's but AT&T has free service where they have the 15, soon 30 million lines of fiber
Hmm.
paid for by that $30. There's no reason Verizon and Time Warner shouldn't be doing the same.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's we have to leave it there, Dave, and pick that up at another time. We're about out of time. So I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Any final comments, Dave, before we sign off?
Yeah, all governments lie. And the best way for any politician to deal with the problem is to appoint a committee.
Okay. All righty. This has been Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned for more news, information, and entertainment on 90.3 FM WHCR. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week, every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Good night.